In the dusty roads of ancient Palestine, there existed a people so despised that Jews would rather take a longer, more dangerous route through the wilderness than walk through their territory. They were considered half-breeds, religious heretics, and enemies of God's chosen people. Yet when Jesus told one of his most famous parables, he didn't choose a priest or a Levite as the hero. He chose one of them, a Samaritan. But who were these mysterious people that sparked such intense hatred? Why did the Jews consider them worse than pagans? The answer takes us back to one of the darkest moments in biblical history: the fall of the Northern Kingdom, a catastrophic invasion and a forced mixing of cultures that created a people caught between two worlds. Their story involves lions sent by God, a rival temple on a sacred mountain, and a religious conflict that lasted over 700 years. Today, only a few hundred Samaritans remain, quietly preserving ancient traditions that predate even Judaism as we know it. Their tale is one of rejection, survival, and unexpected grace, a story that challenges everything we think we know about faith, identity, and who truly deserves God's mercy. The story of the Samaritans begins with a broken promise and a kingdom torn in two. When King Solomon died, his son Rehoboam stood before the people of Israel, ready to take his father's throne. The people came to him with a simple request: make our burden lighter. Solomon had worked them hard, taxing them heavily to build his magnificent temple and palaces. They wanted relief. Rehoboam asked for 3 days to think about it. He first consulted the older men who had advised his father. These wise counselors told him exactly what to do. As we read in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 7, they said, "If you will be a servant to these people today and serve them and answer them and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever." It was simple advice: show kindness and you'll win their loyalty. But Rehoboam rejected their counsel. Instead, he turned to his young friends, men who had grown up with him in the palace. These young advisors told him to show strength, to prove he was even tougher than his father. When the people returned 3 days later, Rehoboam gave them his answer. According to 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, the king answered the people roughly and rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges." The response was immediate and catastrophic. The northern tribes, led by a man named Jeroboam, refused to accept Rehoboam as their king. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 16 records their declaration: "What share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David." The unity that David and Solomon had built shattered in a single moment. The nation split into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom kept the name Israel and was made up of 10 tribes. They chose Jeroboam as their king. The southern kingdom, called Judah, consisted of only 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and remained under Rehoboam's rule. Jerusalem, with its great temple, stayed in the south. The northern kingdom established its capital first in Shechem, then later in a city called Samaria, which would eventually give its name to the people and the entire region. This wasn't just a political split. It created 2 separate nations that would compete, fight, and grow apart for the next 200 years. The northern kingdom of Israel was larger and wealthier, but it struggled with one major problem. Jerusalem, the city where God's temple stood, was now in enemy territory. For 2 centuries, the northern kingdom of Israel stood as an independent nation. It had 19 kings, but none of them followed God faithfully. They worshipped golden calves and foreign gods, ignored the prophets who warned them, and grew more and more corrupt. God sent prophet after prophet to call them back, but they refused to listen. The nation was headed toward disaster. In the east, a terrifying military power was rising: Assyria. The Assyrian Empire was known throughout the ancient world for its brutal warfare and efficient conquest. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they destroyed them completely, wiping out entire populations and cultures. By the mid-8th century BC, Assyria had set its sights on the small kingdoms of the Levant, including Israel. The kingdom of Israel tried to resist. King Hoshea, the last king of the northern kingdom, initially paid tribute to Assyria to keep them at bay. But then he made a fatal mistake. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 4 tells us, "The king of Assyria uncovered a conspiracy by Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison." Hoshea had tried to form an alliance with Egypt and stopped paying tribute to Assyria. It was an act of rebellion that sealed Israel's fate. The Assyrian king, Shalmaneser V, responded with overwhelming force. His armies marched into Israel and laid siege to Samaria, the capital city. The siege lasted 3 long years. Inside the city walls, people starved. Outside, the Assyrian army waited with iron discipline. Finally, in 722 BC, Samaria fell. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 6 records the moment. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away to Assyria, and placed them in Hala and by the harbor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. The northern kingdom of Israel ceased to exist. Its people were forcibly removed from their homeland and scattered across the vast Assyrian Empire. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was the end of a nation. The Assyrians were masters of a strategy called mass deportation. They would conquer a kingdom, take its people far away, and settle them in distant parts of their empire. The goal was to break any sense of national identity and prevent rebellion. Separated from their homeland, their temple sites, and each other, these displaced people would eventually forget who they were and blend into the populations around them. Tens of thousands of Israelites were marched away from the land God had given their ancestors. They were taken to places like Hala, Habor, Gozan, and the cities of the Medes, regions in what is now Iraq and Iran. There, far from home, most of them disappeared into history. They became known as the lost tribes of Israel, and they never returned. The Assyrian Empire didn't just remove populations, they replaced them. An empty land was worthless to them. It couldn't pay taxes or produce crops. So after deporting the Israelites from Samaria, the Assyrians brought in new people to fill the empty cities and work the abandoned fields. This was standard Assyrian policy: mix populations, break old loyalties, and create dependency on the empire. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 24 describes what happened next. Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and dwelt in its cities. These weren't just a few families. This was a massive resettlement program involving people from all across the Assyrian Empire. Each group came from a different place and brought their own gods, customs, and languages. The people from Babylon came from the ancient city that had once been the center of its own empire. Those from Cutha came from a city northeast of Babylon, known for its temple to the god Nergal. The people of Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim each had their own histories and religious practices. None of them knew anything about the God of Israel or the land they now occupied. The Assyrians settled these foreigners throughout the northern kingdom. They moved into Samaria, Bethel, and the other cities that had once belonged to the tribes of Israel. They took over the houses, farmed the fields, and tried to build new lives in this unfamiliar land. But they were strangers in a strange place, and they didn't understand that this land had a history with the God who had chosen it. Not all the Israelites had been taken away. The Assyrians had deported the upper classes, the leaders, skilled workers, and anyone who might organize resistance. But they left behind some of the poorest people to work the land. These remaining Israelites now found themselves living alongside these foreign settlers. They were outnumbered and powerless, watching strangers take over their cities and farms. This mixing of populations was exactly what Assyria wanted. By bringing in people from different places and leaving some locals behind, they created a confused, divided population with no unified identity. There was no common language, no shared religion, and no reason for these people to unite against Assyrian rule. It was a brilliant strategy for controlling conquered territories. At first, the foreign settlers and the remaining Israelites lived separate lives. They spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and kept to their own communities as much as possible. But over time, something inevitable began to happen. They started to mix. People married across cultural lines. Children grew up learning multiple languages and hearing stories about different gods. The boundaries between groups began to blur. The poorest Israelites who had been left behind still remembered the God of their fathers.
You have been conditioned to believe that your pride is merely a character flaw, a temporary lapse in judgment, or a byproduct of a difficult upbringing. You are wrong. Today we strip away the comforting metaphors of Sunday school to expose a far more disturbing reality. A theory so controversial it has been whispered in the shadows for millennia. What if the fall in Eden was indeed just about a stolen fruit, but a systemic invasion of the human species? We are looking at a bio-spiritual hack, an ancient, predatory operating system installed into the very DNA of our ancestors. This ego you cherish, ISNT, your personality. It is an alien malware, a genetic parasite from the serpent test lineage designed to override your original connection to the divine. The war ISNT outside, it is in your hemoglobin. If the ego you defend every day is actually a parasitic entity using your identity as a mask to control you, would you have the courage to destroy it? To understand the modern epidemic of narcissism and self-destruction, we must return to the first clinical outbreak. Most religious scholars describe the story of Cain and Abel as a simple moral fable about sibling rivalry. But when you look through the lens of the forbidden genealogy, you realize you are witnessing a forensic report on the first human soul to be completely hijacked by a foreign pathogen. This is the Cain protocol. In the beginning, humanity was designed to be a mirror reflecting the glory of the Creator. We were meant to be God-conscious. But in the fields of the early world, a mutation occurred. Cain was not just angry that his sacrifice was rejected. He was the first human host to exhibit the full symptoms of the serpent seed malware. Look at the biblical text. When God questions Cain, he doesn't just address the behavior. He describes a predatory entity. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you. This was a metaphor. It was a warning that the ego virus had reached a critical threshold in Cain's bloodline. Cain was the prototype of the self-referential man. He shifted from being a son of the divine to being the sovereign of his own identity. This is the birth of the internal throne. Cain's jealousy was actually a systemic defense mechanism. Because his ego had become his god, any perceived rejection from the Almighty was felt as a death threat to his own existence. He didn't kill Abel because of a ritual gone wrong. He killed Abel to protect the sanctity of his ego. By murdering the only other reflection of God on earth, Cain was attempting to erase the competition. He was the first human to decide that the world was not big enough for both God's presence and his own self. The blood of Abel crying from the ground was more than a call for justice. It was the alarm bell for a genetic schism. From that moment on, humanity split. On one side, those seeking the presence of the Lord. On the other, the line of Cain, a new race of builders, technologists, and conquerors who used their brilliance to mask a hollow core. This is the lineage of self-adoration. Why did Cain build a city immediately after his exile? Because when you lose your connection to the infinite, you must build a monument to the finite. The city of Enoch was the first ego fortress. It was a physical manifestation of the malware, a high-walled enclosure designed to convince the inhabitants that they were the masters of their own reality. This is the origin of our modern society, a frantic, relentless effort to replace the silent presence of God with the noisy, demanding existence of the individual. Here is the controversy that will challenge everything you've been told. The ego was actually a human attempt to commit deicide. Every time you say, "I am the master of my fate," you are running the Cain protocol. You are attempting to murder the divine influence in your life so that your own self can sit on the throne without conviction. Cain didn't just kill his brother. He tried to kill the concept of God as the ultimate authority, and he succeeded in passing that code to you. Every time you feel that burning need to be right, that icy coldness when you are overlooked, or that violent urge to cancel anyone who challenges your self-image, you are not being strong. You are simply a host for a 6,000-year-old virus. You are Cain, standing in a field, wondering why the silence of God feels like an insult. The line of Cain didn't die out. It evolved. It became the foundation of our legal systems, our economies, and our social structures. We are a civilization built by the serpent seed to protect the ego at all costs. We have turned the self into a sacred relic, never realizing that it is the very cage that keeps us from the stars. If you believe the Great Flood was merely a weather event to punish sinners, you have been blinded by the surface-level narrative. Forensic spiritual analysis tells a much darker story. The flood was a cosmic quarantine. It was the final, desperate attempt to stop a biological and psychological monstrosity that had turned the earth into a laboratory of ego. We are talking about the Nephilim. The traditional Sunday school image of the Nephilim is that of oversized warriors, monsters of muscle and bone. But the original Hebrew reveals a terrifying psychological profile. Genesis calls them the Gibborim, the men of renown. In the ancient world, renown was just fame. It was a state of being. The Nephilim were the absolute, unfiltered manifestation of the serpent seed mutation. They weren't just giants in stature. They were the first giants of self-importance. These entities were the original influencers, the first coalesced key opinion leaders of the prehistoric world. They didn't just want to live. They demanded to be the center of the cosmic narrative. When the fallen watchers intermingled their celestial fire with human clay, they didn't just create physical giants. They birthed a psychological supervirus. The Nephilim were beings with 100% ego and 0% humility. They were the first to look at the heavens and say, "I am the brand. I am the God. I am the renown." This is the birth of the cult of personality. While Adam was designed to walk in the shadow of God, the Nephilim were designed to cast a shadow over God. They turned the earth into a stage for their own glorification, using their superior intellect and supernatural power to enslave the minds of lesser humans. They were the architects of the first system of dominance, a hierarchy based entirely on who had the most renown, the most followers, the most legendary status. But here is the deep truth that will make your modern life feel like a trap. You think the flood wiped them out. Yes, It dissolved their physical bodies. It crushed their 15-foot skeletons. But you cannot drown a spiritual frequency. The genetics of arrogance, the digital blueprint of that Nephilim mindset, found a way to survive the deluge. It didn't need a boat. It needed a host. This ego malware migrated from the blood of giants into the collective consciousness of humanity. It retreated from the physical realm and embedded itself into the metaphysical code of the human race. Look at the world around you today. The skyscrapers, the obsession with personal branding, the ruthless hunger for likes, the desperate need to be seen unvindicated at the expense of everyone else. Do you really think this is just modern psychology? No, it is a Nephilim resurgence. The modern ego is simply a miniaturized Nephilim. The scale has changed, but the code is identical. We no longer build towers of stone to reach the heavens. We build towers of digital influence to prove we are superior to our neighbors. The same men of renowned energy that once demanded animal sacrifices in the pits of pre-flood cities now demands the sacrifice of your privacy, your peace, and your very soul on the altar of social validation. Here is the controversy that should spark a fire in the comments. Is your current ambition actually yours, or are you just a puppet for a dormant Nephilim gene? Is your drive for greatness a divine calling? Or is it the ancient serpent seed whispering that you are entitled to be a giant among men? The Nephilim mindset is the ultimate Kediachusiuekua enemy of God because it is the only thing that dares to compete with divine glory. It is a parasite that convinces you that you are the main character of the universe. This is why the world feels so fractured and lonely, because we are a planet of 8 billion Nephilim-hearted individuals, each trying to build a throne in a world that only has room for one king. We have replaced character with renown. We have replaced spirituality with status. We are running a program of ancient arrogance disguised as self-expression. The flood cleaned the earth, but it is up to you to clean the bloodline. As we move into the final part of this investigation, we face the most painful question of all. If this Nephilim code is hardwired into our ego, is there any way to delete it before the next quarantine begins? Or are we destined to be drowned by our own self-importance? You've achieved the goals. You've climbed the ladder. You've curated the perfect image and fought for every inch of your renown. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, a hollow ache gnaws at your chest. Why is it that the more successful you become, the more empty you feel? It is because you are not feeding yourself. You are feeding a genetic monster. You are pouring your life force into a prehistoric parasite that is biologically incapable of being satisfied. This is the ultimate tragedy of the forbidden genealogy. The ego is a bottomless pit, a black hole wrapped in DNA that will consume everything you are and still ask for more. You cry out to God for help, for peace, for a sign. And what do you receive? Silence. You feel abandoned, ignored by the divine. But here is the truth that will shatter your perspective. God's silence is not a rejection of you. It is a death sentence for your ego. The Almighty refuses to answer the prayers of the serpent seed because he will not negotiate with a virus. He knows that as long as your ego is breathing, your soul is suffocating. He stays silent to let the monster starve. He is waiting for the Nephilim within you to finally collapse under the weight of its own vanity, so that the true soul, the one made in his image, can finally take its first real breath. The world tells you that humility is weakness, that it is the surrender of the pathetic. They are lying. In the high-stakes warfare of the spirit, humility is the most lethal hack in existence. It is not thinking less of yourself. It is the decolonization of the soul. When you choose humility, you are performing a violent biological overwrite on the serpentess malware. You are deleting the I will ascend code and replacing it with the let it be done to me frequency. This is the only miracle capable of breaking a 6,000-year-old hereditary curse. To break the genealogy, you must become a traitor to your own pride. You must look at the men of renown and choose the way of the dust. By refusing to be seen, by refusing to be vindicated, and by collapsing into the silence of God, you effectively unplug the serpent's access to your life. You become a systemic error that the enemy can no longer control. This is the controversy that the self-worship industry will never tell you. Your greatest act of power is your total surrender. You are currently guarding a renown that is destined for the fire. Is it worth it? Is the mask you wear worth the soul you are losing? The case is closed. The evidence is in your own pulse. Go to the comments and face the truth. Are you brave enough to kill the king of me to find the kingdom of God? If you are ready to initiate the final overwrite, type, "The malware ends here." Break the lineage. End the curse. Decolonize your soul. Because the throne of your heart is not big enough for two, and the judge is standing at the door.